Mizmor David. Adonai ro'i lo echsar bino deshi yarbitseni. Al mei menuchot yinahaleni. Nafshi yeshovev yancheni v'maglei tzedek lama'an shemo. Gam ki elech begetz al mavet lo ira ra ki ata imadi. Ma yinachamuni. Taroch lefanai shulchan neged sorarai. Dishanta v'shemen roshi kosi revaya. Ach tov v'chesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayai. V'shavti b'veit Adonai la'orech yamim. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Kerachem av al banim richem Adonai al yirei av, ki hu yada yitzreinu zachur ki afar anachnu, enosh kechatzir yamav katzitza sadeh, ken yatzitz ki ruach avrabo ve'enenu lo yakirenu od mekomo. V'chesed Adonai me'olam ve'adolam al yire'av v'tzidkato livnei vanim. As a father has compassion for his children, Adonai has compassion for those who show reverence. God knows how we are fashioned. God remembers that we are but dust. The days of mortals are like grass. We flourish as the flowers of the field. A wind passes over them and they are no more, and no one can recognize where they grew. But Adonai's compassion is everlasting. God's kindness to children's children, to all the reverent ones, endures age after age, unchanging. Lakol zman ve'et lachol chefetz tachat hashamayim, et laledet ve'et lamut. A season is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for planting and a time for reaping, a time for keeping and a time for discarding, a time for loving and a time for hating, a time for embracing and a time for refraining, a time for slaying and a time for healing, a time for laughing and a time for weeping, a time for dancing and a time for wailing, a time for birthing and a time for dying, a time for speaking and a time for silence, a time for seeking and a time for losing. The psalmist writes, O Lord, who shall dwell in your sanctuary? Who shall abide upon your holy mountain? He who lives with integrity, does what is right, and speaks the truth in his heart, who has no slander upon his tongue, who does no evil to his fellow man. Leonard Waldbaum was a fine man. He was a man of integrity and kindness. He sustained a loving marriage to Roberta for 54 years. He and Roberta raised Andy, Josh, and Greg, and his wife Abby, and rejoiced in his grandchildren Josh and Max, and lived as lifelong friends and brothers to Philip and Linda, Art and Irit, and Jerry Landis and Regina. Len and Roberta also remained very connected to Roberta's family, Selma and Ossie Sladek, Paula and Stuart Brooks, and Steve and Debbie Rosen. It was a large, extended family, a kind family, a loving family. Lenny cared about Jewish life. He was a lifelong member of the Alliance. He was very smart, with a curious mind. He lived a good life and had a large impact on all of us, all who knew him. Lenny was born in July of 1941 at St. Joseph's Hospital to Hyman and Ann Waldbaum. They lived down the street from the Latermans, who they became close friends with. Lenny grew up on the West Side and went to all the West Side schools, Cheltenham, Lake, and North High School. He was always among the most popular kids in the school. He was very handsome. All the girls wanted to be around him. He was an athlete. He played many sports, including wrestling. He was very strong. He also was very smart in competing on the school debate club. He won awards for debate, take both sides of any issue. Ron Ramstetter, one of the teachers at North, took an interest in the high-achieving kids, Lenny among them, and tutored them in philosophy and literature. He had a great relationship with his brothers. He taught Art to ride a bicycle, sending him fast down Stewart Street towards Sloan's Lake. Lenny also taught Art how to swim, a good skill when sending your little brother down a steep hill towards Sloan's Lake. Len did have some other challenges. One 4th of July, he and some family members went out on a sailboat on Dillon Lake. Len did not know how to sail a boat. The boat was called the Shared Mistress. A supplementary engine on the boat had run out of gas, and the sailors did not get back until after midnight. No one was amused. Then one time, Len and crew tried to deliver mattresses to the house by putting them on top of his car. The mattresses promptly fell off, and Len backed the car, running right over the mattresses. Again, not much amusement then, but these all made for such great family stories. There's much laughter and joy in the telling. Len and Roberta met when Roberta was just 11 years old, and married while Roberta was a senior in college in 1962. Roberta went back to his college, Dartmouth, to stay in married student housing. Roberta made that sacrifice at the time, but with Len's blessing, was able to return later to achieve not just her BA, but also an MA and PhD. Lenny was a great student in high school and in college. He didn't have to study that much and still got good grades. Matriculation at Dartmouth was almost unheard of for a boy from Denver's West Side. When Lenny graduated, he and Roberta wanted to heed President Kennedy's encouragement for service and join the Peace Corps. All the papers were signed and they were ready to go to Africa when Roberta got pregnant and plans changed. Andy was born. Lenny went to DU Law School and became an attorney. He joined some small law firms, and he worked for one for 28 years. He loved the law. He loved working with his clients, some of whom had colorful lives. The extended family were together a lot for holidays and family celebrations. The family traveled domestically and overseas. They spent time in Italy, allowing Bobby to pursue her scholarship and passions. There's so much more to say about Lenny, and you will hear now from members of his family. Suffice to say that Lenny lived a very interesting, important, and impactful life. All who knew him well will miss him and miss him deeply. May God bind up Leonard Waldbaum in the bonds of eternal life. May Lenny now rest in peace. Amen. Now there are speakers to share their experiences of Lenny, both as a grandfather, father, and husband. We'll start with Greg, and then Andy, and then Bobby.
Thanks, everybody, for coming. I wrote a few things down, and hope it shares a little bit of our life with him, and I'm sure you all have your own stories. So, what I choose to remember and the road not taken. Len Waldbaum led an amazing life. He lived every day, every moment to the fullest. I learned a lot from my dad, and what I choose to remember on this day is not what we have lost and not his fragility these past few years, but all that we gained because we were part of his journey. I choose to remember a dad who was on the sideline of every game I ever played in. Seriously, every football, soccer, lacrosse game I ever played, every musical, every bad play I was in, he cheered me on and he celebrated whatever it was and the competition. I choose to remember swimming in our pool on 17th Avenue for decades as a child. and then more with my own kids. Every summer, Dad loved that pool, those gardens, that backyard. We even replanted raspberry bushes from the old house from our grandparents, and they flourished at his backyard. He always welcomed friends and family. His home and pool were open to all. I choose to remember an amazing summer in the mid-'70s, diving off rocks and swimming in the Adriatic Sea with my dad and my brothers. We were probably 10 or 11. He was always ready to do anything, anywhere, anytime. His sense of adventure was infectious. I choose to remember a father who never got mad, not even when we went four-wheel driving one time. Myself and a good friend, Greg Goldberg, we came home. There was a gouge from the front of the car to the back of the car. It was a brand new car, and he didn't even flinch. He was just happy we were safe. I choose to remember taking him, just the two of us, to the farthest place I could find on Earth, the Antarctica. We took a Soviet research vessel across the Drake Passage. We ate ice fish caviar. We drank vodka shots with the Russian crew, and we walked with penguins. It was one of the best trips. I choose to remember a business partner, an investor who backed every idea, company, and investment I ever came up with. He stuck with me through the good and bad times. He never complained about losses, and he always celebrated wins. I choose to remember a man who cared deeply for his family, his parents, Ann and Hy Waldbaum, his brothers, Phil, Jerry, and Art, and their families. I have endless memories of the Waldbaum clan, many of who are here today, holidays, mountains, Thanksgivings, travel, all of them good. I also choose to remember the Waldbaum brothers being part of our family. Art specifically was integral to the bris of my son Max and at our wedding in Italy. I'm very grateful for that. Thanks. I choose to remember a dad proudly sitting at my 5th grade knighting at Grayland, the same way he sat at Joey and Max's 5th grade knighting 40 years later. He was always there, happy to see his boys regardless of the generation. I choose to remember my dad hiking on the top of Keystone Mountain with me and Abby before we were married. I think he was just about my age, mid-50s, skis on his back, trudging up that mountain. And no matter what, he was going to get up and ski down with us. I choose to remember my dad's endless visits to Dartmouth, both during his time and my time, to fraternity basements, canoeing on the Connecticut River, nights at the Hanover Inn. He loved that place. It runs in the family. Dartmouth is the ultimate work hard, play hard place. It fit his personality perfectly. I choose to remember a man who introduced me to every entrepreneur he ever worked with, and there were a lot, as we discussed with the rabbi yesterday, giving me a view of the world and opportunities I could never have gotten on my own. From uranium mines in Mongolia to real estate in Italy and startup companies in Denver, many of which still operate today. From those experiences, I learned more than I ever did getting my own MBA. I have now started and run 6 companies of my own. Never would that have happened without my dad and laying that foundation. As was noted, I choose to remember a dad that bought a 24-foot sailboat, docked it at the Dillon Marina, handed us the keys, said have fun, and he had never sailed a day in his life. We had a lot of fun with that boat. I choose to remember a dad and grandfather that cared for my sons as his own, took them on trips, followed their sports and academic endeavors with the same tenacity as he did mine. In his later years, he pretty much only wanted to know what the boys were doing and how they were doing. And finally, I choose to remember a dad that even as he was declining, never failed in his interest in what his family was doing, what the boys were doing, what was going on in the businesses, even as his world got smaller and smaller these past few years. What I have chosen to remember and relay here is the celebration of my dad and all that he meant to everyone in this room. It is a celebration of a life well lived, the perfect description of his journey. I end with a poem of a life well lived in mind, one that has special meaning to and for my dad, The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. Special in its relevance to a life well lived, and special because Len actually had Robert Frost lecture him at Dartmouth in the early 60s. Frost, who enrolled in Dartmouth in the fall of 1892, dropped out before completing his degree, but he maintained a deep fondness for Dartmouth and returned often. From 42 to 47, he was a Dartmouth Fellow, and he repeatedly gave lectures and readings until his death in 1963. And Len was at Dartmouth from 59 to 63. Not too many people can say they walked in the same space as Robert Frost. And one of his most famous poems, the masterpiece, is not a funeral poem. It's not specifically about death. It doesn't attempt to encourage us or to ponder the brevity of life, but it is a wonderful tribute to a life well lived. The closing lines, "I took the road less traveled by, and that has made all the difference," are a testament to a person that broke the mold and embraced life to the fullest. Len Waldbaum, attorney, dad, husband, son, brother, grandfather, and friend, the definition of a life well lived. With that, I end with Frost's masterpiece, "The Road Not Taken." Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler long I stood. I looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth, then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that, the passing there had warned them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step, had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of my mom, my siblings, our family, I want to thank you for celebrating our father's life today. My brother and I didn't compare notes at all, but I find it kind of apropos and interesting that I too am going to look at the prism of my father's life through a life well lived. And it's very interesting. I used to read that poem when I was training every year to the students because of how important that is. I always found it interesting growing up and almost humorous that a lot of people never believed in the American dream. They didn't believe in the Horatio Alger ethos, the American work ethic, because my dad, his brothers, their parents, exemplified and epitomized the American dream. Dad's parents came here, immigrants, didn't speak English, had nothing but their clothes on their back, but had belief in faith, in family, in community, in charity. And my dad and his brothers exemplified the American dream. And Grandma, I know you're looking down. You're a very humble person, but you did okay. You ended up with an entrepreneur and a businessman, a lawyer and 2 doctors. I think it's fair to say that they all represent the American dream. When I look at my dad, there's so many memories, wonderful ones. But I really want to start with the lessons he taught us, the lessons he taught everyone around him, the lessons he wanted to impart on his nephews. Dad wanted to teach us, but he wanted to live by example. He wasn't pedantic. He didn't sit behind a desk and tell us what to do, but he did what he thought was right. My dad was brilliant, humble, charitable, kind, but he taught us never, ever confuse kindness with weakness. My dad was an extraordinarily strong man. My dad was an amazing son. So he didn't tell us how to be amazing sons. He was an amazing son. He never missed any holiday, from birthdays to Jewish and non-Jewish holidays to Mother's Day, where he didn't go with Grandma to buy plants. Her love of gardening translated to his love of gardening, translated to us. Every time Greg and I would move, the first thing they would do was plant. Maybe that was his studying philosophy and spending too much time with Voltaire, but he really wanted us to all have our gardens. My dad taught us the importance of friendship. Greg mentioned, but my dad had the most unique, eclectic, sublime friends you could ever imagine. So as talking about people, the importance of friendship, he had the most amazing friends. I think of some of them from Dr. Stein, who was this wonderful doctor who spent a third of his life doing Doctors Without Borders, giving free eye care to people all over the world, but was so fascinated with Harry Houdini that he bought the entire collection of Harry Houdini props from all of his magic tricks, and he owned the Harry Houdini Museum. I think of Larry Winograd and Wallace, who he went to Mongolia and other trips with. So my dad was an amazing friend. My mom's going to share with you what an amazing husband he is. The only thing that I am always fascinated by and admire is both my mom and dad love the life of the mind. Dad was a voracious reader, an amazing traveler. And I don't know what deal they made when they were 21 years old. Really, on December 25th, senior year, they got married. They had nothing, but they must have made a bargain that we're going to travel the world every year, maybe sometimes twice, whether we could or not, whether we should or not. Mom, I don't know how many times you went to Italy, 30, 40 times? I have no idea. They went to Machu Picchu, they went to Eastern Europe, they went to Israel. They traveled the world because they wanted to show us that anything is possible. What I'd like to share is, and so many thoughts are coming through my mind, about examples of things that Dad taught me. And there's really three that come to mind. And it was Dad's way of teaching us by illustrating really important life lessons, by living them, not telling us what to do. So the first one was, in my 16th birthday, Grandma and Grandpa gave me this really cherry 1967 Chevy Impala 357. And it was this gorgeous car. It was a convertible. It was so big that 4 people could sit in front and sit in back. And Greg and I managed to destroy that car in about 6 years, but it was the coolest car we ever had. One summer, I went and got that car painted. I'd worked all summer long, and I took it to get painted at a paint shop on Colfax. About 3 to 4 months later, I was getting it car washed, a day just like this, and all the paint just washed off, just stripped off. So I called Dad, and I said, what do I do? He said, you're 16 years old, it's your car, go back to him. So I went back there and said, guys, the paint's gone. And they said to me, well, we'll prorate it. You did have paint for 6 months, so we'll do that. So I called my father, and he kind of chuckled and said, I'll be right there. And he walked in. I was still sitting in the lobby. He kind of winked at me, pulled out his card. He looked at these people and said, I used to be the deputy DA. You guys really have 2 choices. You're either going to paint my son's car, or every news station in the state is going to be here. The DA's office is going to be here, and my office is going to sue you. And when I'm done with you, not only will you not have a job, but my son will own this paint shop. The owner came up. My dad was calm. Remember, you can't take kindness for weakness, and my car was painted that day. And they did a really good job. They used primer, and it never washed off again. So I learned a lot of lessons that day about my father. I learned it's important to have a good lawyer, but it's also really important to stand up for what is right. Another really interesting memory I have, and again, there's extraordinary ones, is I had the blessing to be able to spend what started off as a term abroad at Oxford University in England. And I don't know who was more excited, me or my dad. And I was able to go there and read Shakespeare in a university that my college was started in the 13th century. And through good luck and a lot of hard work, I had an opportunity. I was there for a term, and they were going to give me credit for a semester here in the States. So I remember calling Dad up and saying, Dad, I have this really cool opportunity. I get to stay for 2 more terms. There's only one problem. My university in the States might not give me credit for it. So I had 1 quarter equals 1 semester. I was now going to stay for 2 more quarters studying with the same people, and I had to drop out of college. And Dad, typical Dad, kind of laughed on the phone and said, a lot of my friends are calling, their kids are calling them right now, and they're saying, Dad, Mom, I have to be checked into drug rehab. I'm being thrown out of college. You're calling us and saying, you want to run around England for another 9 months reading Shakespeare. You have dropped me out of college for that? That sounds like a pretty good deal. Says a lot about my dad, about what was really important to him. Greg talked a little bit about Dad's and Mom's sense of adventure. Dad and I, and Dad to his very end, was a voracious reader. And we started reading, if you haven't read them, of the books by James Clavell, Taipan, Noble House, King Rat. Incredible books. And a lot of them explore the history of British Hong Kong. And we were reading these books and comparing notes and sharing stories, and he said, and Greg, I don't know if this was before or after you guys saw penguins in Antarctica, but Dad said, we're gonna go on a grand adventure, and we're gonna go to Southeast Asia and visit all the places we read about in those books. So we flew into Hong Kong to start with. I don't know if those of you who were at Hong Kong before they moved the airport, but it's like flying a 747 into the middle of downtown Denver. And if the pilot were to sneeze, he would take out the plane and all the skyscrapers next to it. And that was kind of the story of my dad's life in many ways. It was scary, it was adventurous, it was amazing, and it was sublime. So we fly into Hong Kong, and the first thing we go to is the Happy Valley racetrack, because a lot of British expats and people who lived in Hong Kong, that's where they did most of their business. So we went to the racetrack. We went to the ports where all the shipping came in, and we kind of relived these wonderful stories that we were reading together. We took the cable car in Hong Kong up to that beautiful pinnacle. And for those of you who've been to Hong Kong, on the other side, there's this great, amazing skyscraper with this magnificent hole in it. And the guide was telling us that the person who they're big into feng shui, the person who built this building knew that there was a dragon who lived in the mountain. And the dragon every morning and every afternoon had to go to the water to get a drink. And if he didn't go through, and he would go right through this building and take it down. But the architect made a deal with the dragon that he made him a gateway to the water so he could go in every day. And Dad and I Dad and I both were amazed and enthralled by that. Next place we went to, well, actually, when we were in Hong Kong, Dad did go buy a suit, because you have to go to Hong Kong tailor and buy a suit when you're in Hong Kong. Then we went to Macau. And Macau is another magical place. And he and I were just enthralled. At the very top of Macau, there's an old medieval church with only one wall standing. And there's this, like the Wizard of Oz, this path that starts at the center of almost a piazza, and it goes in circles and circles, and it goes through the entirety of Macau. And in a lot of the books we read, Macau was filled with pirates. For hundreds and hundreds of years, it's where the opium trade was done with the Chinese for the Silk Road. And then Dad said, we need to go gambling, right? We do a lot of the gambling here, but let's go to a casino where there's only Chinese. So Dad and I go into this, we're the only guys in there, the only foreigners, and we're playing blackjack. And we're playing like $20 a hand, $25 a hand, no big deal. But if they think that the Westerners are lucky, they play your hand for you. So there's 12 people behind me and Dad playing our hand. I had 25 bucks down there. Some of these guys had thousands of dollars. So it was terrifying. Dad would just laugh, but you know, I don't know, I would hit here, Dad, but there's 10 people behind you, we might not get out of here tonight. It was a blast, we had so much fun. During this trip, we went to Bangkok, and we went around and learned the culture and the history of the Thai people, and what a wonderful city that were in the temples. We went to Singapore, and our guide was a child when the Japanese invaded Singapore, and they invaded on bicycles. And this little kid, who was now an adult, was telling the story of what it was like to be in Singapore during World War II. But the most fascinating and the most telling was when Dad and I went to China. And I had the opportunity to spend a day on the Great Wall of China, which is one of the most beautiful and one of the greatest follies mankind has ever made. To wander on that wall with Dad was magical. We went to see the terracotta soldiers, where 10,000 clay soldiers are guarding many of the emperors. And it reminded me a lot of a poem by Coleridge. It's in Xanadu did Kubla Khan, a stately pleasure dome decree, where Alph the magic river ran from sea to sun sea. And that, again, was our story of China, but also the story of my dad. Let's be different. Let's have challenges. Let's go and go on amazing adventures. The greatest memory I have is Dad and I went. Well, first of all, I have to tell you that Dad, at every one of these crazy countries, would eat food off of food trucks. I don't know why he would do that. It terrified me. He didn't care. He had no idea what he was eating, but he thought it was kind of funny, and who knows? So that's what Dad would do in every country. So we're walking into the Forbidden City, and on the right-hand side was a Buddhist monastery. And Dad looked at me and said, let's go light a candle for Grandpa Mac. And I said, that's kind of a cool idea. Why would we do that? And Dad was, I don't know how religious he was, but he's pretty spiritual. And he said, maybe we got this whole Judaism thing wrong, and maybe it's really other religions that need to take care of my dad. So we went in, and lit a candle for Grandpa Mac, asking Buddha to take care of him. So as I close, my idea of my dad's life, well lived, I imagine him right now sitting at a food truck with, up there with I don't know who else, but Buddha's there with him, Yahweh's up there. He's looking down upon us. He's kind of with his very wry, very sardonic smirk. What are these people doing? I mean, I'm having a good time. So with that, Dad, thank you. I love you. I'll always miss you. And you're a great dad.
Can you hear? Okay. I think we should talk more to our children. I'm sitting here thinking, I never heard some of these stories. Well, I lived with these fellows almost my whole life with these guys. And I'm hearing things today I never heard before. So it's a lesson to be learned, to listen, to ask questions, and to listen more carefully and not to wait until moments like these. Although I thank you from the bottom of my heart for what you have to say. We have a theme going here, and the boys and I didn't share what we were going to say. But it is interesting to hear what they have to say. So, first of all, I too thank you for those of you who were able to come today, and I believe that people are live streaming. So it's from the bottom of my heart that I thank you for being here. The boys speak more extemporaneously than I do. I always write everything down. I guess because I feel like talking and writing at the same time. So I'll just begin this. Dear family, friends, colleagues, I have several colleagues here from the University of Denver, and Rabbi Dahlin, and I hope I won't forget anybody. I've written a final letter to my best friend, who I guess is there, and lover, Leonard Waldbaum. I wrote it on March 20th, which is 2 days ago, when Len passed away. Comes a time, our grandfather, Papa Rosen, would say, for everything. And he did say that. And I would add, comes a time for growing up. Comes a time for education and work. Comes a time for marriage, children, and blessed grandchildren. Comes a time for growing old and letting go. Comes a time for resignation and acceptance of mortality. Comes a time for losing loved ones. Today, 2 days ago, Leonard passed from this earth, or as we say in Italian, è scomparso. He disappeared. I love that in Italian. Not passed, but disappeared. To where we know not, and that is the great mystery of life. No one knows quite what to say when someone disappears forever. We're sorry for your loss. Our heartfelt condolences. He's in a better place, and so on, as I have done myself. But for me, this is not a day of mourning, although I deeply mourn his passing and will miss him sorely, but a day of great joy and thankfulness. I'm thankful for having been born on the west side of Denver. into a community of predominantly Ashkenazi Jews that I and Leonard were born, who cared not only for their own, but also for the extended families in their midst. A number of you are here today. I'm thankful for the wonderful education we received in the public and religious schools we attended, because we were lifelong members, Rabbi Dahlin, and you know that, of this synagogue, not in this space here, but in the old synagogue on Mead Street, the second synagogue on Stewart Street, which was right across from Colfax Elementary, where we went to school, and now in this beautiful sanctuary and this beautiful synagogue. I'm thankful for having met Leonard Waldbaum when we were 11 years old, when he was number one on a long list of my boyfriends. I think the last time I checked, because I don't throw anything away, I think there were 15 names of boys, and he was number one, okay? I'm thankful for the gift of a long marriage that produced 3 incredible sons, an angel of a daughter-in-law, and 2 amazing grandsons. I don't know how you got so tall, you guys. For my sisters, my brother, my sisters-in-law, Regina, I count you as one of them, and my brothers-in-law. For my many aunts and uncles, my many nieces and nephews who are also in this room. But who were you, Leonard Waldbaum? I've asked myself that question. I have to admit that he was and always remained an enigma. You heard some of it from Andy and Greg. In elementary, junior high, and high school, he was probably one of the smartest kids in the class, an intelligent young man who never studied. I'm looking at one of my grandsons, because he knew all the answers without studying. He was popular, but aloof. All the girls wanted to date him, but he would never show his cards. He was Mr. Cool, as we used to say. He and I had a fiery relationship, and in fact, never really had a regular date in high school, as we were always quarreling with each other. I would go out with another guy, and he and I would arrange to have late dates. What does that mean? Some of you know. That meant that my dates would drop me off at home after our date, and Leonard would be waiting in his car down the block to pick me up afterwards. Because we could never spend a lot of time with each other, because we were fighting all the time. But it had to be a short period of time, and that was after I went out on a date with somebody else. Don't ask. I don't know. Leonard went off to Dartmouth College, as you've heard, in Hanover, New Hampshire, and I went to CU Boulder for our undergraduate years. He was always adventurous and lived on the edge. One spring, he drove 2,000 miles to Boulder. That's 4,000 miles round trip to see me. He didn't tell his parents. He was just 30 miles away from home. And he drove back to Hanover. Mom and Dad never knew that their son came to town to see me. In his junior year, he studied abroad in Germany and traveled around Europe. While in Madrid, Spain, he and a friend were arrested and put into jail for having thrown their seat cushions into the bull ring and jumping in to retrieve them. They didn't just throw them in, they jumped into the ring to get them back, and therefore they were arrested, and he ended up in a jail. Okay. In Rome, he had rented a car. Their car, with another friend, was broken into, and all their belongings were stolen, and your father had to send him money. He had no money whatsoever. So everything was stolen. When we were newly married, he and Norman Singer were arrested for selling illegal fireworks on the 4th of July. Don't listen to this, Max and Joey. And my father-in-law had to bail them out. We were married already. I think, Andy, you were a baby. And the list goes on. He became a great lawyer. Anyway, we decided to get married on Christmas Day, the 25th of December, in our senior years of college. You know, Jews had nothing to do on Christmas Day. And nobody wanted to go to a Chinese restaurant that day. So we said, Christmas Day is a perfect day to get married. Okay. Much to the happiness of the Rosen and Waldbaum families, who lived just 5 or 6 blocks from each other, by the way. I think it was because we were always having upsetting phone calls. So we said, let's get married and so we can stop arguing. The reasoning is not there, as you can see. So we can stop arguing, right? So we should get married. It goes on. The invitations were sent out to 500 people already. But at Thanksgiving, Roberta, me, decided she didn't want to get married after all. And she flew out to Hanover, New Hampshire, to break off the engagement. I'd already had started to have showers, by the way. She then changed her mind, and the wedding took place. My mother-in-law, Ann Waldbaum, told me after I married him, and I quote, "He's yours now, and I never want him back." She wasn't kidding. So I didn't know where to send him if his own mother didn't want him back, but she didn't. Why then did I marry him? Quite simply, it was because I knew if I didn't, I would think about him for the rest of my life. Leonard was a brilliant lawyer, and I see some of his law partners here, with a keen legal mind and a very strange assortment of interesting but bizarre clients. Not all, some of you are here, and maybe you weren't bizarre, I don't know. As a DA in Jefferson County, which was his first job, he was in the district attorney's office. This is an example. He represented a mass murderer. I'll tell you about that some other time, who used to call our house from Canyon City on the weekends. He couldn't talk at a certain time because Canyon City was calling, and the mass murder that he was defending was on the phone. Okay. In his law firm, Waldbaum, Korn, Koffenberger, he represented, among others, the Colorado Teachers Association, Larry Winograd, if you remember him, the Contact Lenses Society of America, a uranium engineer with mines in Mongolia, and was instrumental in purchasing the rights to natural gas in Colorado. Interesting. He loved, and I did too, to travel the world to exotic places. And he allowed me to follow my dreams, pursue all my educational degrees. I didn't have my bachelor's, my master's, or my PhD when we married. I got all of those after our marriage. And my passion for all things Italian, including the home we bought in Umbria, Italy, where we lived un'altra vita, another life. Rachel, una vita nuova, a new life. He allowed me to surround myself with beauty and antiques. and to fill our home. I don't even think he liked antiques. I don't know. I never asked him I never asked him, do you want modern furniture? Do you want contemporary furniture? I don't know. I just filled our home with what I loved. He never said no, never. So I don't know if he liked it. You can ask him, but I don't know. So he allowed me to surround myself with beauty and antiques, and to fill our home with family heirlooms and objects of art. I hope you'll all come by our home. I hope you're all invited, and Rabbi will talk about that. Who else? What other man would have allowed a large collection of perfume bottles, my collection, to take center stage in a class vitrine, a glass case in their living room? So he allowed me to do everything that I wanted to do. Heaven is awaiting the arrival of a most unique character in its midst, and it never will be the same once he gets up there, I am sure. Dear family, friends, colleagues, everyone, today an old friend and a lover has vanished from the earth. Yet I am supremely grateful, blessed, for the many exciting years we were granted together. I know that he has not passed on, but has rather disappeared, scomparso, from earthly view, but never from my heart. I would like to end by reading, and Rabbi knows this and has given me permission, from a book called The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. He says so many wise things, as do the Hebrew prophets. And this particular reading is on marriage. Then Almitra spoke again and said, "And what of marriage, Master?" And he answered, saying, "You were born together, and together you shall be forevermore. You shall be together when the white wings of death scatter your days. Aye, you shall be together even in the silent memory of God. But let there be spaces in your togetherness. And let the winds of the heavens dance between you. Love one another, but make not a bond of love. Let it rather be a moving sea between the shores of your souls. Fill each other's cup, but drink not from one cup. Give one another of your bread, but eat not from the same loaf. Sing and dance together and be joyous, but let each one of you be alone. Even as the strings of a lute are alone, though they quiver with the same music. Give your hearts, but not into each other's keeping, for only the hand of life can contain your hearts. And stand together, yet not too near together. For the pillars of the temple stand apart, and the oak tree and the cypress grow not in each other's shadow. I love you, Leonard. I send you off with tears of joy, but wonderful memories, wonderful friends, wonderful family, a wonderful institution that sustains us. And that is my final letter to my husband that I share with you today.
I'd like to announce that the family will be receiving visitors today, tomorrow, and Thursday from 3 to 8 at the home of Roberta and Len in the Polo Club. Services each of those nights will be at 7 p.m. El Shaddai, Almighty God of the living and the dead, send comfort to your children who grieve. Overcome by the pain of loss, they need your help to focus on the triumph and the joy in Leonard Waldbaum's life. Help them to meet grief with courage, to face sorrow undaunted. Help them to treasure what is now theirs because Leonard has lived in this world. Should despair threaten or faith falter, sustain us all, Adonai, for you are our refuge and strength, our ever-present help in troubled times. And let us say, Amen. Please rise now for the memorial prayer. El Malay Rachamim Shochen Bamromim Hamitzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Hashchina V'ma'alot Kedoshim Utahorim Gazor Akiyam Mazhirim Et Nishmad Eliezer Nachum Ben Chaim Yitzhak Bechana Shehalach La'olamo B'gan Eden Tehei Menuchato Ana Baal Harachamim Hastirehu B'seita Kanafech La'olamim Utzror B'tzor Chayin Et Nishmato Adonai Hu Nachalato V'yanuk B'shalom Al Mishkavo V'nomar Amen. El Malay Rachamim, exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure to the soul of Leonard Waldbaum, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude our service here at the Hebrew Educational Alliance. We'll have interment at Golden Hill Cemetery. We do not have an escorted procession today. However, everyone is still invited to the interment. If you wish to join us at the cemetery, we'll ask you, as soon as we escort the family and the casket to the cars, we'll ask you to get to your cars as quickly as possible and start making your way. You are welcome to follow the hearse and the family car. However, you must obey all traffic laws if you choose to do so. We'll ask you to remain in your places as I invite the pallbearers forward. He did announce it. That's right. Yeah.
3 to 8.